All right, guys, welcome back to the garage. We're going to switch gears here. We're going to go under the hood, do a little science project, I think. All right, under the hood here, we got a K&N intake, and I don't think I'm a big fan. I don't care how nice of a intake you got or filter or how big it is. If you can get hot engine bay heat through to the filter, is it really doing much? Now, sure, on a cold engine, when you first start driving, I'm sure there's a power increase. On a dyno with the hood up, I'm sure there's a power increase also. Less restrictive filter, bigger piping straight through. But what happens when you drive around town for a while and you got heat soak on the engine? All that hot engine bay heat is getting to your filter, raising the intake air temps. And you know what that does? It kills your timing. Now, I've been trying to do some research on actual numbers. I've seen some tuners claim at 90-degree intake air temp, you can start losing timing. And then I've also read it's somewhere around the 118-degree mark where you start losing timing. I did hook up a scan tool and did some testing just to get an idea what kind of temps the intake was seeing. And at the end of this, I'll share those numbers with you and do a comparison after we get done with this little project. So let me explain what we're going to do. Now, if you're familiar with these cars, you'll know one of the best intakes is the Legmaker, and what it does is it comes off 90s and goes down there in front of the wheel well, and what that does is relocate the filter down there outside of the engine bay, giving you as close to ambient temp as possible, and that's what you want. Now, another thing I've been looking into is the intake air temp sensor. As far as location, on a stock 5.7, it's right here. And I've read that the sensor can actually heat soak from engine bay heat and your radiator fans blowing hot air on it. And that sensor can actually read a few degrees higher than what your intake temp is actual. Now, the K&N relocates it here, a little farther downstream from the throttle body, but still, I mean, it's getting all the engine bay heat from the block, radiator fans blowing on it. So I'm sure this sensor gets heat soaked. So another thing I'm gonna do is relocate it down here. Now, as far as parts, I just went on eBay and searched up some piping. This is 3.5. This brand on eBay carries 3.5 piping. I got a 90. And that'll 90 straight down in that hole. And then we'll have to use a little bit of this 45 just to kick it away from the wheel well liner towards the front bumper. And I got a couple clamps and couplers to make it all work. So let's get started. First thing, pull this off. It needs cleaned. And I just happen to have a K&N kit from years ago. And we'll pull this heat shield out and measure for the 90. And as far as the intake temp sensor, it's right there. This 90 will go like that. And I'll probably put it right here so that it's over here away from the engine bay, maybe on the front side even, away from the coolant reservoir. Now, how much of a difference is this going to make? I don't know. This is an 08, so it's got the pre-Eagle 5.7, which is probably the bottom of the barrel Hemi of the lineup. So I want as much as I can get out of this at all times. I do expect to see a lower intake temp compared to ambient, and I also expect that it won't heat soak like this does. Just wait till you see the numbers later. Okay, I got that box out of there, and just to give you an idea, what we're going to be working with is basically it's going to 90 off the stock pipe just like that, and pretty much matches right up with that hole. I'm going to have to shorten it just a little bit to make it there. That's about perfect. And then that 45 will just connect to the pipe right there and be good to go. Now, what I really wanted to do was a Hellcat airbox in here, but it requires some work with the power steering reservoir because it's in the way, so you'd have to relocate that. But I like the factory airbox for the Hellcats, plus they got the snorkel in the front. You could run a duct to the front grille. Everybody wants an arm and leg for those things, just a stock airbox. So this is a much cheaper route. I already had the intake, you know, it came with the car. So I figured just to be the most budget way to get better air to the engine. Now, so what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna use some tape. Tape this guy into place, just so I can see how far off I am from the hole. And that'll give me how much I need to cut off of here. All right, you can see I pretty much got it lined up, but it is a little towards the back. Now I could twist this and so that outlet was aiming more towards the middle here, but I think I would rather have it go straight and then straight down through that hole and not turned. There is this bracket on the K&N intake that holds it in place. I think if I just bend this out and just push the intake this way, it'll line right up as far as this distance goes. I'm still going to have to shorten the pipe, but as long as I can get this 90 to go straight down through that hole, it should be good. Oh yeah, see that? Way more room. I can tweak that bracket just enough to center it there. That'd be awesome. I got my bracket adjustment tool here. I'm gonna pull this pipe off just so I can get to it better. Just slide it off just like that. I can get in here. Just give it a little tweak. That should be plenty right there. Before I tighten that down, let's get this bolt back in here. Tighten this up. Oh, that's looking good. All right, with the bracket tweaked, you can see it's nearly there. I think my plan would be to have a little gap between these two pipes once the coupler's on there, just to allow any flex so this isn't banging in this hole here, but it's super close. All right, just measuring. I got about a 1/4 inch gap here, and it's basically touching over here. So an 1/8 inch off this pipe would move it that way, just enough to be centered. But like I said, I want a little bit of a gap here just for flex. So I think I'm gonna take a 1/4 inch off this pipe, and it should put me right where I want to and still have a little bit of play here. I think eventually I do want to put a bracket holding this pipe centered in that hole. So having a cushion here plus this coupler, you know, it's flexible, should allow the engine to move and have enough flexibility in the whole intake system. So time to cut. All right, I got my 1/4 inch marked. I'm gonna cut that off. Okay, I got the edges cleaned up. Let's stick this in there, see how it fits. Let's see. That's the two pipes touching right there. I think that's spot on. I can take it out just a little bit and it'll be perfect. There's that pipe done. Now we need to jack the car up and do the 45 underneath. Before I forget, I got the intake air temp sensor out along with the grommet, and I had a grommet kit and I found a size that fit perfectly in that hole to seal it off. So now we can relocate that sensor to this pipe here. So now my biggest question is, do I want to go on the front side, or do I want to go on the back side, or down here? Decisions. Okay, I think I decided probably right in there. I didn't really like this side or the front or even the back. This way it gets it away from any heat source, and then I can just extend the harness down, follow this power steering line, and it just plug in right there. So I measured the grommet, should be a 3/4 inch hole. So I just got to put a hole in this pipe, and this grommet should fit in there. And then my sensor. Now the Canadian kit did come with this extension harness. I don't know if I want to extend my factory harness all the way down there or extend this extension harness. I haven't decided yet. I don't know if it's going to matter, but we'll get to that later. Okay, let's get this grommet in there. Perfect fit. Slide our intake temp sensor in there. Perfect. This pipe's ready to go. There you go, that's where it's gonna sit. I just have to extend the harness down, probably route it up through here, and it'll just plug in right there. All right, I think I'm gonna go ahead and clamp this together and put the clamp down there before I go underneath the car. That way this pipe is positioned right where I want it. And we can work on that 45 and filter. Got my clamps, got some fancy black worm clamps. All right, ran into a little hiccup. This factory hole is too small for the pipe and coupler to fit through there. So what I'm doing is gonna put that coupler in there about halfway so that I just slide the pipe in, clamp on this side, and then underneath slide the 45 up and clamp down there. And definitely not gonna need a bracket now because that's gonna hold that pipe in place. Which brings me to another problem. If I stick this pipe in there, you can see these two pipes are touching now. I definitely don't want this to be all one hard piece. I like some cushion. So when that coupler's there, the pipes have a gap so that this can allow some movement. I guess I'm cutting some more off of this pipe. All right, took another 1/2 inch off there, so 3/4 of an inch total. Let's see how it fits. Yeah, that's much better. Got a little gap there, just so the pipes aren't touching. I'm gonna put this coupler on. Okay, there's the upper section done. There's just a little bit of a gap right there. You can feel it, the two pipes aren't touching. That one's down there. It's all secure. It's time to go underneath. Okay, normally there would be a splash shield under here that you'd have to remove, but mine is missing. So there's my pipe sticking out. I already know I want to shorten that. It's way too long. I think I'm basically just gonna need about this much and this much, just enough for the couplers to slide on. I think I'm just gonna go ahead and cut that out because I know I need this as short as possible. Okay, I can kind of see where the bend starts and then this straight. So here's my coupler for the filter section. So I'm just gonna line that up with that bend mark and we'll just go roughly half of that coupler. That way this will be the coupler and this will be the filter. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on this side. All right, got my 45 cut. I'm gonna test fit it under there and I'll show you guys how it fits. There it is up there with the velocity stack filter adapter. Hopefully the filter fits. Now here's the K&N that came off of it. You can see I cleaned it and the filter media started falling out of it. Don't know if that's gonna work. So I got me an Amazon special filter, but I'm wondering if that's gonna be too tall. Well, it fits in there barely. Nothing's tight or anything like that either, so I'm gonna attempt it. If not, I'm going to return this one and get a shorter one. All right, got the fit. Doesn't touch anything. Here's another shot. Just barely fits. Doesn't touch anything. That should work. I think I decided to go ahead and extend this extension harness and just leave my factory harness alone. Well, that's not good. There's a break in the wire and it was taped up. Guess that's where I'm cutting. Okay, got some wire, same gauge wire, not the same color, but I'm just gonna loom the whole thing anyway. Okay, I'm gonna plug it in and see how long we need it. Probably just follow this harness down. I'm gonna zip tie it down here to the factory harness. Actually, I don't think I'm gonna shorten it at all. I'm gonna keep it that length. Okay, I got some loom. I'm gonna loom this up. That way I can zip tie it in. Well, I ran out of black zip ties, so I had to use some white ones for now. Got it coming over here, following the harness down there. And it loops around, and there it is. Now before, this plug was sitting up here rattling around, so now I got it secured to the harness down here. That should work. Okay, well that concludes the install part of the cold air. It should be a true cold air now, just like the Legmaker. Also, I did notice that the Legmaker really locates the intake air temp sensor in the same spot basically as what I did. So I'm glad I picked that spot. Obviously, if your car is a daily driver, you drive somewhere wet or something like that, not ideal. You're not gonna want your filter hanging out under the bumper like that. So for me, this is just a toy. Only comes out in nice weather. I have a daily beater Subaru over there that I use. I'm not concerned about the filter being down there. So now let's go test. I'm gonna try to replicate exactly what I did last time before I did the extension on the intake. Hopefully we get some good results. Guys, I got notes here, but I wasn't sure how to explain my results. Now, both tests were consistent as far as the drive time and stuff, and I monitored the IAT through a scanner the whole time, and I tried to do the same routes both times. Before I did the added pipe, it was 80 degrees out, and then the day I did it with the cold air, the true cold air, it was 81. Trying to keep it as consistent as possible, but you know, there's a lot of things you can't control, and I'm no expert. This isn't exactly supposed to be super scientific or whatever. It's mainly for my entertainment only, but I thought I'd share. Now, I thought, do I want to just give you guys the numbers and let you figure it out, or should I just dumb it down? Or I wasn't sure. So I think I'm just going to give you my 2 cents of how I feel about what I saw. So basically what I was trying to see is what were my intake temps compared to the ambient air, like how far higher it was between the two styles of intakes. And basically what I found is as long as you're driving, they stayed pretty similar as far as being how high they were above ambient. The short ram stock K&N ran a few degrees higher than the cold air, but they stayed roughly average 10 degrees hotter than the ambient temp. Now, you would expect the cold air to be way closer to ambient. And after I give you my rundown, we'll go over why I think that's not the case. Through my whole test, the cold air did perform better as far as temps. However, the minute you stop and sit at like a red light or a drive-through or something, the heat soak. The short ram, the heat soak was more prominent and faster, as in you stop and I was watching the temps and you could see the intake temp just start climbing as soon as you stop moving. A lot of that has to do with the engine bay heat just overwhelming the filter and the intake piping, especially because it's metal. And you got to think at a stop, you're not moving. There's not a whole lot of airflow inside the intake pipe. So it's just all heat soaking at a stop. Now, the cold air also did it. It did heat soak if you sat idling, especially after driving for a while. The only difference between the two is the short ram had a really hard time recovering from that heat soak, at least 3 times as long to get the intake temps to start dropping. The new cold air, as soon as you start driving, the temps start dropping and they recover much faster than the short ram did, which is good, but it sucks that at a stop, you're still heat soaking. Now, how I think I can improve the cold air is my theory is the reason it's heat soaking also, even though the filter is outside the engine bay, is it's all metal piping exposed. And when you're in low throttle or no throttle, like idle situations, like sitting at a stoplight just idling or cruising at a steady speed, there's very little airflow inside the intake track because you know your throttle body is barely open. So that metal piping is heat soaking, which is heating up the air inside the whole intake track during those situations. And that would be why even with the cold air that you still get heat soak. So is it a win? My opinion, it is, because like I said, as soon as you start driving, the temps drop. And to me, that's what I would want. Yeah, it sucks at a stoplight or drive through or something. Your intake temps start climbing because the piping's all hot and it's heating up the air inside because there's no movement. But once you start moving and the throttle body is open a little bit more, you're getting air flowing through the piping, the temps instantly start dropping. And one thing I noticed was cool is if you're cruising at a steady speed with a very light throttle, and I was watching my intake temps and they were just like steady, you know, if I gave it any kind of extra throttle and it got air moving through the pipe, the temps instantly would drop, like very quickly. And then you get off the throttle and start steady cruising again, and the temps would just even out again. So that proves to me that the cold air, having the filter outside the engine bay, is way more beneficial than having the filter in the engine bay exposed to engine bay heat. So I think my next thing will be is some kind of heat wrap or something on the piping, just to try to keep it from heat soaking. That way, cruising around town at stoplights and stuff, there's gonna be a lot less of that heat soak, and that would just let the intake temps recover much faster. For the little bit of money I spent on the 2 pipes and the 2 couplers with some clamps, I'm happy with it. I would say if you have a stock air box, just throw like a, you know, a green filter or K&N filter in there and just call it good. The short rims only really are going to give you engine sound. Now, there are some nice ones with enclosed boxes. I think the AFE is an enclosed box. And obviously the Legmaker, which is basically what I based mine on, try to replicate. It's carbon fiber, the piping is. So it's supposed to not heat soak like a metal pipe would. And then they also relocate the intake air temp down to where I did. So those are good options. If you want to relocate your power steering reservoir, you could run a Hellcat box in there. And if I didn't already have the K&N and I had a stock box, that's what I would have done. I would have swapped to a Hellcat box, modified that to work, and then ran a duct from the opening into the front grill. I was looking at just a universal power steering reservoir, and there's plenty of room up there by the master cylinder. You could just run your 2 power steering lines. They're low pressure, so you don't have to worry about the high pressure line. Just it's 2 low pressure lines up to that reservoir, and then you throw the Hellcat box in there with a nice filter. Even the OEM Hellcat filter, it flows really well. Obviously, it supports 700 horsepower. So I'm telling you, your off-the-shelf hot air intake, just to give you an idea, those 80-degree days, driving around, the intake temps average maybe 15 to 20 degrees hotter than ambient with the short ram. And the minute I stopped, I did a 10-minute stop just to replicate like a drive-through situation. So you're out and about, the intake temps got to 156 degrees. That's 76 degrees hotter than the ambient temp. And then I left and did a drive to see if those temps would drop, and they struggled to drop. I maybe drove half a mile to a mile at like 45, 50 miles an hour, and they only got down to 120 degrees. So that's insane, in my opinion. Almost 160 degree intake temps with that short ram sitting for 10 minutes on an 80 degree day. Now imagine you're in a hot climate where it's like, you know, 90s or something. So in my opinion, all I can say is keep your stock box. Don't spend your money on an intake unless the filter is sealed off or relocates it outside the car. Obviously, like I said before, if you're daily driving your car, you don't want your filter out there exposed to the elements. All right, so that's the end of that. I'm gonna look into some kind of thermal wrap for the piping and then be done with it. Basically, I'm trying to do supporting stuff before the spring and then hopefully do a cam install. I'm pretty happy with the intake. I want to do a 180 degree thermostat and maybe a radiator. That should help keep the Hemi cool because they run hot. All right, appreciate you guys watching. Not sure what's next. Subscribe if you haven't. Do all those things for me if you could. And I'll see you on the next one.